He always sat on the same bench, right by the old oak tree, where the sunset hit the mountains just right. General Mitchell, retired, decorated, and nearly forgotten, except by the little girl who ran to him every day after school. Her name was Emily, 7 years old, full of questions. That day, the question wasn't about her math homework or her favorite cartoon. It was simple, but it stopped the wind cold. "Grandpa, were you ever scared in the war?" He looked out at the mountains, his eyes tracing memories buried deep, the kind that aged like scars, not stories. His hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the echo of what he remembered. "Yes," he said softly. "There was one time. I was scared in a way I can't quite describe." Emily sat beside him, crisscross, clutching her juice box. "Was it the aliens?" He gave her a look, part surprise, part pride. "Who told you about that?" "You did. Kinda. Last week, you said something about the warning?" He exhaled, long and slow. "I did. Maybe it's time you heard the rest." It wasn't in the textbooks. The Galactic Council had made sure of that. The records were sealed, classified to keep panic away. But for those who lived through it, especially the ones on Lunar Command, the memory wasn't on paper. It was in the quiet moments, when the stars looked just a bit too close, and silence reminded them of the days before everything changed. "I was stationed on Luna Base," he began. "It was quiet then. Peaceful, even. Earth had finally reached the stars, joined the Council, shook hands with aliens that had wings, scales, even no bodies at all. We thought we'd made it, mankind, part of something bigger." Emily's eyes lit up, and he gave her a small smile, then continued. "Then one day, a special session of the Galactic Council was called. Every ambassador, every high-ranking officer, every historian was summoned. And the message wasn't one of unity. It was a warning. A desperate one." He remembered the silence in that council chamber. The air itself felt heavier. The archivist of the Vrel stood before us. He was older than any human had ever lived, seen stars die and form again. His voice shook. He showed us records, ones hidden from public view. Empires that had vanished overnight. Civilizations burned out like candles. All with one thing in common, Earth. Emily blinked. "But we didn't do anything." "No. That's just it," Mitchell said. "We didn't start anything. But those civilizations, they came for us. A long, long time ago. Before we had cities. Before we even had writing. And they never returned." The Council had learned something over millennia. Earth was to be watched, but never touched. No colonization. No interference. Leave them alone, and they remain peaceful. Wake them, and you won't live long enough to regret it. "Why didn't they just tell everyone that?" Emily asked, frowning. "They did," he replied, voice low. "But time makes people forget. New empires rise, new voices argue. Some believed the old warnings were myths. Some saw humans as weak, unworthy of space, of power. And so, the warnings turned into stories. And stories turned into challenges." He paused, remembering the look on the ambassador's face that day. "The Council told us, if the wrong species ever ignored that warning, if someone ever tried to dominate humanity again, they wouldn't just fail. They would awaken something ancient. Something terrible. Not because we're monsters. But because no species survives what Earth has, without learning how to end monsters." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Did someone ignore the warning?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes. And they paid for it. There was a time before that day when Mitchell believed war was over. That diplomacy had finally won. But the warning changed everything. Because it wasn't just a prediction, it was a prophecy. I was only a captain back then. I didn't believe it, not fully. How could I? Earth was peaceful, united, exploring the stars. We were dreamers, scientists, explorers. But when that alien fleet approached, when we saw the transmissions from the Tiraki, everything changed. He didn't describe the ships just yet. Not the horrors. That part of the story belonged to another day. Today, Emily needed to understand the quiet before the storm. The feeling of helplessness that came before the awakening. "There's a fear," he said finally, "that goes deeper than guns or monsters. It's the fear that something in you is sleeping, waiting. And if it wakes up, you might not recognize yourself anymore." She looked confused, but nodded anyway. Mitchell chuckled dryly. "You'll understand when you're older." Then he pulled out a small silver coin, one he'd kept hidden for decades. On one side, the United States flag. On the other, the emblem of Luna Command. He pressed it into her hand. "You keep this safe," he said. "It reminds me of who I was, and what we did. Not out of anger. Not for revenge. But because we were warned. And when the moment came, we didn't flinch." She looked at the coin, then up at him, solemn as a soldier. "Did we win?" she asked. He smiled, not the proud smile of a victor, but the soft, worn smile of someone who survived. "We did. But the cost is a story for another evening." And as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in soft red and orange, Emily leaned against her grandfather, holding that coin tight, unaware that she held a piece of the most terrifying and beautiful chapter in human history. He closed his eyes, feeling the wind brush his face, carrying whispers of a war no one remembered, except those who still bore the weight of silence. They came like gods, dressed in gold and carved steel, descending from orbit in towering monoliths shaped like thrones. The Tiraki Empire had no need for diplomacy. Their message was delivered without words: 6 colonies incinerated, a research vessel torn apart in public broadcast, and Earth's satellite network silenced in less than an hour. For the Galactic Council, it was the first true test of their oldest fear. For humanity, it was the awakening. The Tiraki considered themselves divine. They had conquered over 70 intelligent species, rewriting cultures, rewriting history, and bending entire solar systems into a religion of obedience. To them, humanity was nothing but another primitive race to be reshaped. The Council warned them, formally, repeatedly, even desperately, but the Tiraki laughed. A few grainy records and ancient threats didn't match their vision of reality. They had never been defeated. Their war doctrine was unbreakable. Their fleets were unstoppable. Until they met Earth. The first strike landed near Saturn, obliterating a science station. 4,000 dead. Civilians. Families. Children. No warning. No declaration. Just dominance. What followed was a sequence of events the Council would never forget, not just the retaliation, but how fast it happened. Humans didn't argue. They didn't send envoys. They didn't broadcast pleas. They simply moved. Within 6 hours, the United States Space Force activated Protocol Obsidian. It was a relic of the Cold Era, covert, experimental, deniable. Yet it existed, buried under miles of redacted history and contingency paranoia. And when it came online, the response was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. There was no public announcement, no anthem, no rallying speech. Just cold, synchronized movements across shadow fleets no alien knew existed. The Council convened again in panic, this time not to issue warnings, but to brace for what they feared most. Some pleaded to intervene, to mediate before Earth's full war posture ignited. Others voted to stand back, bound by ancient law. If the warning was ignored, humanity must not be restrained. Not again. The Tiraki were confident. Their main fleet moved toward Earth slowly, parading through space lanes, destroying unmanned probes, sending messages in riddles. Their religion promised them an easy conquest. But they didn't understand what humans were anymore. They thought Earth was simply another world, strategically positioned, technologically competent, but spiritually inferior. What they didn't know was that Earth didn't operate on fear. Not when families were vaporized. Not when children bled in zero gravity. Humanity responded not with chaos, but with horrifying precision. By the time the Tiraki reached Mars, 3 of their fleets had disappeared. Not destroyed, erased. No debris, no signal, no survivors. The loss confused their strategists. It was impossible by their standards. Their weapons outclassed human technology. Their AI was centuries ahead. Their soldiers were biofused war priests bred for domination. But human warfare had never been about symmetry. It had always been about necessity. The Taraki flagship, Voice of Ashes, broadcast demands to Earth's governments. Surrender, or see the cradle of humanity reduced to cinders. What they received in return wasn't a message. It was an audio file. No encryption, no translation needed. It was the sound of breathing. One man. Calm. Deliberate. Then a voice, low and emotionless. You should have listened. The file lasted 4 seconds. Within minutes, every remaining human fleet across Seoul went dark, voluntarily. They turned off their beacons, cut communications, and vanished from sensors. The Council watched in collective dread. Earth had disappeared from the map. Not physically. Strategically. Psychologically. They had gone silent not in defeat, but in preparation. And the galaxy remembered what that meant. Human history had always been drenched in struggle. Their empires had risen through fire, their cultures shaped by loss and perseverance. They had invented peace not as a gift, but as a hard-won evolution. They didn't celebrate war. But they had become terrifyingly good at it. Not because they loved it. Because they hated it enough to master it. The Taraki's second wave reached Earth's orbit. No resistance. No defense grids online. Their cruisers circled the moon, their orbital platforms beaming down messages of glory and salvation. Then it began. It wasn't the might of Earth's fleet that struck first. It was the collapse of Taraki logistics. Refineries failed. Energy reserves emptied. AI support modules began reporting phantom commands. Taraki units turned on each other without explanation. Their own fleet, sabotaged from within by malware built into systems they didn't know had human fingerprints. The war hadn't started with a shot. It started years ago, when humanity got access to the Council's archives and quietly began planning for this exact moment. The Taraki fleet commander gave the order to retreat, but it was too late. Earth's ships reappeared not from orbit, but from inside. From within their ranks. Camouflaged, embedded, and awake. Stealth cruisers that had been dormant in asteroid belts. Submersible carriers launched from Earth's oceans, carrying weapons that bent physics. And above all, a weapon the galaxy had never catalogued, the Judgment Engine. The engine wasn't a bomb. It was worse. A quantum anchor that destabilized matter-specific energy fields. Designed for one task, destroying Taraki hull signatures and only Taraki hull signatures. Everything else remained untouched. One ignition and 32 ships simply imploded. No sound. No explosion. Just silence and then void. The horror wasn't in what humans did. It was in how easily they did it. The Taraki never sent a third wave. Their empire fractured in less than a week. Internal rebellion sparked. Subjugated species rose up, suddenly aware that their gods were mortal, and their greatest fear had come to pass. Humanity didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They simply erased the threat and walked away. The Council convened one last time. Their faces were pale, their minds numb. There was no celebration. No flags. No conquest. Just the understanding that Earth had been provoked, and the universe was lucky it ended there. One ambassador from a distant star system asked a question that would be recorded forever. Why did they stop? The answer came from the Terran representative, who had stood in silence the entire time. Her voice was not angry. It was tired. Because we were never fighting to win, she said. We were fighting so we wouldn't have to fight again. And just like that, the room fell quiet. Not from fear, but from the realization that humanity had remembered the warning. And now, so had everyone else. The aftermath left a wound in the galaxy that no one could ignore. Whispers about humanity spread like wildfire, not just among the political elite but across every planet, station, and frontier colony. The Taraki were not a minor power, they were a cornerstone of the galactic hierarchy, and their destruction shifted the balance in ways that terrified the oldest and boldest civilizations alike. For centuries, The galaxy had existed under the unspoken assumption that some empires were too big to fall. Earth shattered that illusion overnight. Suddenly, no species, no matter how ancient or advanced, could pretend it was invincible. The Council's emergency meetings turned from theory to desperation. Every member world debated how to handle humanity's existence moving forward. Some argued for alliances, trying to bring Earth into the fold as a protector rather than an outsider. Others proposed containment, isolation, even sabotage, fearing that humanity's anger could resurface at any moment. But the ones who understood humans best, the ones who had studied their rise, their endless history of internal wars and heartbreak, knew something deeper. Humanity didn't seek conquest. It never had. What humans feared most wasn't defeat or extinction. It was becoming what they had fought against for so long, monsters in the dark. Across Earth itself, the atmosphere was somber. There were no parades, no victory celebrations. The loss of the science station, the lives taken in the opening Taraki assault, weighed heavily. News networks carried footage not of the enemy's destruction but of grieving families, of names etched into memorials, of folded flags presented with trembling hands. The emotional weight wasn't in the victory, it was in the cost that came before it. Even those untouched by personal loss felt the ache of it. Humanity had survived, but at the price of remembering again how easily loss could reach into the heart of every home. Veterans from the operation were honored quietly, without fanfare. Medals were issued in private ceremonies, often refused by those who had seen the worst of it. There was a clear understanding among them: they hadn't fought for glory. They had fought because there was no other choice. Many of them would carry the memories of what they had done for the rest of their lives. Some would never find peace with it. Others would dedicate themselves to preventing it from happening again. Meanwhile, on the galactic stage, humanity's reputation hardened into something few could have anticipated. They became a symbol not just of strength but of inevitability. No species wanted to believe they could lose everything in a matter of days. And yet Earth had shown them that underestimating a species born in hardship was the quickest path to ruin. Empires that once viewed humans as backward and chaotic now reviewed every old treaty, every unspoken insult, with new dread. Diplomats from Earth didn't need to threaten or posture. Their silence was more chilling than any show of force. Alien scholars and historians scrambled to revise their theories. Humanity didn't fit neatly into any previous model of galactic behavior. They weren't conquerors. They weren't zealots. They weren't isolationists either. Instead, humans embodied something far older, far harder to predict: survival at all costs. And that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about the ability to endure tragedy, to process grief, and to emerge from it more determined than before. It was about the terrifying resilience to face annihilation and still hold on to a sense of self. Rumors began circulating among distant colonies. Tales of human children taught about the stars, not as places of conquest, but as places where trust must be earned. Stories of Earth's engineers building stations designed not for war, but for healing. Medical outposts offered aid to species barely known to the Council. Trade missions arrived bearing supplies instead of demands. Earth wasn't rising as a new galactic tyrant. It was rising as a reminder that strength could be wielded without cruelty, and that survival didn't have to breed oppression. Yet, underneath all of it, there was still a tension no words could erase. The Taraki survivors, scattered and humiliated, whispered of revenge. Some council members watched Earth with growing resentment, convinced that humanity's restraint was just a phase before dominance. Fringe factions began plotting sabotage, interference, anything to disrupt the terrifying stability Earth now represented. They couldn't understand how a species capable of such overwhelming violence chose not to use it. And what beings cannot understand, they often fear, and what they fear, they sometimes try to destroy. Earth's leadership understood this instinctively. It wasn't enough to win a battle. It was necessary to win the aftermath. Initiatives were launched to deepen cultural exchange, to send human teachers and artists across the stars, to remind the galaxy that humans were more than their wars. Universities opened programs welcoming alien students. Earth-based corporations partnered with planetary governments to rebuild what the Terraki had ruined long ago. The strategy wasn't conquest through force. It was influence through kindness, through cooperation, through a slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust. There were setbacks. There were betrayals. Earth suffered more losses, quiet ones, forgotten by the broader galaxy. Ambassadors assassinated by extremist cults. Trade convoys vanished in pirate raids. Peacekeepers taken hostage on lawless moons. Every time it happened, there was a choice to be made: retaliate with overwhelming power or respond with measured resolve. Again and again, Earth chose the harder path. They sent rescue teams, not war fleets. They sent negotiators, not assassins. Slowly, the galaxy began to believe what the Council had feared all along: that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its ability to destroy. It was its ability to endure and still choose hope. Even when hope had cost them everything before. In time, statues were erected not just on Earth, but on alien worlds. Not statues of war heroes or generals. Statues of human children reaching out to the stars. Statues of doctors and teachers, of farmers and scientists. Symbols of a people who, given every reason to become monsters, chose instead to become guardians. The galaxy changed because of it. Borders softened. Ancient grudges eased. Old empires learned that survival didn't have to mean domination. All because one species, provoked to the brink of extinction, remembered what it meant to fight not for power, but for the simple right to exist in peace. And though fear of humanity would never vanish completely, it became tempered by something even stronger: respect. A respect born not from terror, but from understanding. An understanding that the greatest force in the galaxy was not the ability to destroy worlds, but the choice to protect them, even when no one else believed it was possible. The Terraki defeat rippled far beyond immediate military consequences. It cracked the very foundation of trust between galactic species, making old alliances feel brittle and exposing the Council's failure to predict the depth of human willpower. The Council, for all its age and experience, realized too late that it had miscalculated. Their warnings had been sincere, but ultimately, they were treated as empty threats. Now, every species had to reckon with the reality they had ignored: humanity was not simply another participant in galactic politics. They were a force that could not be neatly categorized or controlled. Conversations in the highest circles turned grim. Entire subcommittees were tasked solely with analyzing humanity's psychological resilience, something alien cultures had always struggled to grasp. On Earth, despair and horror could forge a kind of determination that was almost chemical in nature, almost instinctive. Pain was not a deterrent to them. Pain was a crucible. And while other species recoiled from trauma, humanity learned to carry it, to live with it, and, most dangerously, to let it sharpen them. From the frozen mining outposts of Elta Prime to the dense trade hubs of VRYNN's reach, every political operative and intelligence agency began quietly revising their doctrines. Earth's military strength wasn't merely in weapons or strategy. It was rooted in a collective memory, a history soaked in sacrifice and rebirth. No battle, no loss, seemed to break them in the way it would break another culture. Instead, each hardship only seemed to drive humanity toward even greater innovation and resolve. On human colonies scattered across the stars, life adjusted with a somber pragmatism. Governors instituted new defense drills, but the tone wasn't paranoid. It was calm, deliberate, almost weary. Civilians didn't panic. They prepared. Young adults volunteered in record numbers for public service and training programs, not out of a lust for violence, but out of a shared understanding. Survival was no longer a given, and every person had a role in securing the fragile peace humanity had earned. The collective memory of what the Terraki had done was still fresh, too raw to forget. At the cultural level, humanity's mythos transformed. Heroes of the conflict were immortalized not just for their victories, but for the moments they had protected others at their own expense. Stories of medics who refused evacuation until every wounded alien soldier was treated spread alongside tales of soldiers who offered mercy even when vengeance would have been easier. This narrative didn't just live in textbooks or media broadcasts. it lived in the way Earth redefined itself. Being human, after the Taraki War, meant carrying the responsibility of power without succumbing to its temptations. But not all corners of the galaxy celebrated this restraint. Underground networks, pirates, dissidents, rogue states, saw Earth's forbearance as weakness to exploit. Attacks against human installations increased. Ships disappeared. Trade routes were threatened. Humanity responded in the way that terrified observers most, with a surgical precision that ended threats without fanfare or cruelty. Earth's fleets didn't burn worlds or demand reparations. They simply neutralized the danger, stabilized the region, and moved on, leaving a clear message without ever speaking it: provoke us if you dare, but understand the cost will be swift and inevitable. Meanwhile, diplomatic missions expanded. Earth didn't retreat inward as some had feared. Instead, it reached outward, forging new alliances, binding old enemies to new purposes. For every act of aggression faced, Earth answered with 2 acts of outreach. Agricultural technologies were shared with famine-stricken worlds. Medical breakthroughs once hoarded by Earth's wealthiest nations were distributed freely to desperate colonies. Human engineers built schools and hospitals on planets few other species even bothered to map. Trust was rebuilt not through words but through actions so persistent that even the most cynical began to believe. Among humans themselves, a silent understanding deepened. They had stared into the abyss of extinction and found something inside themselves worth saving, not through dominance, but through shared purpose. Across all walks of life, from soldier to scientist to schoolchild, there was a sense of duty larger than any individual ambition. Earth was no longer just a home. It was a promise, to themselves, to their fallen, and to the countless species who watched them with equal parts fear and hope. Still, fear lingered in the dark corners of the galaxy. The Taraki's defeat bred resentment among those who had once secretly admired their power. Whispers of alliances built to counter Earth's influence began to surface. Old rivalries, dormant for centuries, reignited under the banner of resisting human hegemony. To many, the thought of humanity choosing peace was a trick, a trap waiting to snap shut. They couldn't comprehend that for humans, mercy was not a performance. It was a survival tactic honed over millennia of suffering, betrayal, and hard-won resilience. Earth's intelligence agencies took note but didn't panic. Plans were laid quietly, contingencies drawn up. Human leadership had no illusions about universal goodwill. They understood that influence would always breed enemies. But they also understood something even more powerful. In the hearts of countless ordinary beings across the galaxy, seeds of gratitude and admiration had been planted. Seeds that tyrants and warmongers would find very hard to uproot. In the background, the Council itself underwent a quiet transformation. Old species that once scoffed at humanity now lobby for closer ties. Those who had once treated Earth as a curiosity now sought Earth's protection. Even the most isolationist members realized they could not afford to ignore a species that had turned grief into strength, vengeance into mercy, and fear into hope. None of it erased the losses. The names of the fallen were still read aloud in ceremonies. Families still visited graves, both on Earth and on distant worlds. Veterans still woke with the memories of horrors no song or speech could ever soften. But from those scars grew something rare and precious, a unity not based on fear of the other, but on the shared memory of almost losing everything and choosing to build again anyway. In distant systems where human boots had never stepped, children told stories of the humans who had come like fire and rain, terrifying and healing all at once. In forgotten corners of the galaxy, rebel cells traded tales of humanity's mercy and ruthlessness in the same breath, unsure which was more fearsome. And above it all, Earth moved forward, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as stewards of a fragile, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could still be something better. Not because it was easy. Not because it was safe. But because it was the only future worth fighting for. When the final council session of the year was called, it was not held in the grand chambers of Centauri Prime but on Earth itself, by unanimous decision. It was a move that once would have been unthinkable, bringing the galaxy's highest political body to a world once seen as reckless and primitive. But no one questioned it now. Earth had become not just a political power but a moral one, forged through blood and unbroken by terror. The delegates arrived not with arrogance but with quiet respect, aware that they were setting foot on ground that had earned its place at the heart of galactic destiny. The meeting opened with silence, a rare moment of shared understanding between dozens of species. No grand speeches. No flowery declarations. Just a collective breath drawn in memory of those lost across all worlds in the chaos the Terraki had unleashed. Every representative present knew that their civilization might have been next if not for humanity's stand. Gratitude, pride, and a quiet shame mingled in the air. Gratitude for survival, pride in newfound unity, and shame that it had taken the suffering of so many to reach this fragile peace. Humanity's representative was not a general, nor a politician adorned in gold and medals. It was a civilian, a teacher from a battered coastal town who had lived through the initial attacks, someone who had seen war not from the bridge of a flagship but from the ruins of her neighborhood. She spoke with the kind of simple honesty that carried more weight than any practiced oratory. She did not offer demands. She did not revel in Earth's new status. She spoke of the cost, of the friends lost, of the cities burned, and of the determination that had refused to let grief turn to hatred. Her final words hung heavy in the air. "We do not seek to rule. We seek to remember. And we ask you to remember with us, not just today, but in the decisions you make tomorrow, and the next day, and the one after that." When the vote was held to amend the Council's charter, making Earth a permanent core world and granting it a stewardship role over rebuilding efforts across multiple sectors, the decision was unanimous. Not out of fear, nor out of expedience, but because, for the first time in centuries, the Council members believed that power could be wielded by someone who understood its true price. Even among Earth's own people, there was a quiet reckoning. Across the cities and towns rebuilt from rubble, there was no celebration. Instead, there were candlelit vigils, silent walks through memorial gardens, moments of shared grief that needed no words. Flags hung not in triumph, but in mourning for what had been lost to secure a future that still trembled with uncertainty. In classrooms, children were taught the history of the war with a reverence that acknowledged not only human bravery but also the suffering of those who had once been enemies. The Terraki, now a shattered people, were not hunted to extinction. Earth's new leadership ensured that resources were set aside to help rebuild what was left of their civilization, on a barren world far from the galactic core. It was a gesture that baffled many. Why offer kindness to those who had inflicted so much horror? But humanity understood something most others didn't. Mercy was not given because it was deserved. Mercy was given because it was necessary to end the cycle of vengeance that had plagued the galaxy for too long. In the years that followed, small but vital changes rippled outward. Trade networks once dominated by powerful species now prioritized cooperation over monopolization. Military alliances that once existed solely to deter aggression shifted their focus toward disaster response and humanitarian aid. Earth's influence was not just felt in laws or treaties, but in the slow, steady changing of hearts across dozens of worlds. The galaxy did not become perfect. Old hatreds and rivalries still simmered in the shadows. But something foundational had shifted, a collective understanding that survival demanded more than strength. It demanded compassion and vigilance in equal measure. Among the veterans of the Terraki War, many found new purpose. Some became diplomats. Others worked to dismantle old systems of oppression on distant worlds. A few simply returned home, choosing to live quiet lives among the families they had fought so fiercely to protect. Their scars, visible and invisible, were not hidden away but honored as reminders of what it meant to stand when standing seemed impossible. Meanwhile, Earth's scientists and explorers pushed outward again, not with fleets of war but with ships of discovery. New alliances were formed not by treaties but by shared missions to reclaim dying worlds, restore broken ecosystems, and recover lost histories from the ruins of ancient civilizations. Each new endeavor was a statement that humanity's place in the galaxy would be defined not by its capacity to destroy, but by its determination to rebuild. And yet, woven into every triumph was an unspoken vow, known to every human heart, and increasingly recognized by the galaxy at large. If ever the darkness rose again, if ever another power sought to drown the stars in blood and terror, Earth would stand ready. They would fight if they had to, but they would hope, always, to find another way first. Their strength was not just in arms but in spirit, in the refusal to allow horror to define them, no matter how often it tried. The teacher who had spoken at the council meeting lived out her days in a modest home by the sea, far from the halls of power. Her story became one among many, woven into the broader tapestry of a galaxy slowly learning to heal. But in quiet moments, when the stars reflected on the waves and the night was still, she would remember the faces of those she had lost, and smile, knowing that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Across Earth, and across worlds once shattered by war, there echoed a simple truth, understood in every language spoken under every star. Humanity had been warned, had been tested, had been scarred, but they had not been broken. And in their survival, they had given the galaxy a gift greater than victory, a reason to believe in something better.